Okay. All right, so let's look at photosynthesis. How is it? Let's look at the word photo. Let's start with this because this is a real easy word. When I tell you someone took a photo, what are you thinking? Frank, since you're over there, could you start a pot of tea, please? Take a picture. Yeah? A photo is a picture. No, it's not. A picture is a photograph. Photograph. We call it photo for short, right? Because that's what Americans do. That's what people do, right? We make it shorter because it's easier. But it's a photograph. What is a graph?
A way to collect data so people can...
Yeah, well, not collect it. It's a way to represent it. Do we draw? It's a drawing, correct? Again, that's good. A graph is a drawing. Graphic arts. You've heard of graphic arts? What is that? What does graph mean? I just said it. Drawing. Graphic arts are the drawing arts. Versus what? Music arts or, I don't know, acting, the acting arts, right? So drawing, graph means drawing. Is that clear? So why do we call it a photograph? What does photo mean? Go ahead. Close. I mean, it's a good idea. It's not right, but yeah. Light. That's right. Photo means light. That's correct. So photo means light, and a photograph is a drawing of light. That's it. Now, I hope you understand that everything you see is light. Do you understand what I'm saying? I know people misunderstand this because we're so used to seeing, I see Kayla. I don't see that girl. What do I see? I see the light that comes off that girl. I don't know what that girl looks like. I just know what light that comes off that girl looks like. And if you think this doesn't make a big difference, when you go to see a magician make an elephant disappear or make something disappear, they're able to do it because you never see anything. All you ever see is a reflection of things. So they're able to bend light, and if you can bend light, you can make things disappear. All right, so photo means light. As I hope everyone knows, synthesis means what? To make. So this is to make. So photosynthesis is making something with light. Now I need you to understand what that means. You're sitting on what? What are you guys sitting on?
Stools.
On stools. What are they made of?
Wood.
Wood. Where did wood come from?
Trees.
Trees are what?
Plants.
Plants, yeah. So all that, what you're sitting on, came from a tree that grew up out of the ground, tall and strong, got cut up, and you're sitting on it. You eat sugar. All of that comes from, look, the light. That light got turned into that stool. What? That's real magic. That's a phenomenon that's just amazing. Wouldn't you like to know how to take... Can anybody go and catch me a photon? Can anybody go catch... I can tell you this, you can catch them. Can someone go catch them? Like, you can't catch them like lightning bugs, right? You've caught lightning bugs before?
Yeah.
You just capture them.
No children.
Don't kill them. They're beautiful little things. There's no reason to kill them. It makes so much sense. All right, so anyways, going catching light beams, photons, is not really possible with your hands, right? But you catch them all the time. And plants have to catch them, right? Because plants use them to make this stuff that we call wood. So plants have to catch them because this was made from light. This used to be a light beam. A billion photons got turned into this. How? That light, the plant had to capture them. How did the plant capture them? How can you capture light?
By eating.
Not eating it.
Eating the things that make the light.
No.
Why can't you just do light?
Huh? You're capturing light right now. You're capturing it.
Well,
eyeballs capture light. You're capturing it. You see me walking around, don't you? You're capturing me. You're capturing the light that bounced off me. The question is how? What do you use to capture light?
Our senses.
No, you use your senses, yes, but how do your senses use? What do your senses use to capture light? There has to be something.
Neurons. ATP.
No. Say that again?
He said you don't know.
You do know. I wouldn't be asking you if you didn't know. Now you're all being ridiculous.
What was the question?
See, that's what I'm saying. The question is, what is used to capture light?
Nerves in your brain.
I'm asking you the thing that your neurons interpret light. Your eyes do capture light, but what do your eyes use to capture light? You use a thing.
Nerves.
Let me give you another clue. It's a riddle, but it's like most riddles, the answer's easy. Because most riddles, the best riddles, have an easy answer. You just don't see it. Yeah?
Wait.
Is it what? It is matter, but there's a specific kind of matter that captures light. That's an interesting point. Let me give you a little. It is a molecule, that's right. But it's a specific kind of molecule. They are proteins, that's right, mostly. Before I answer, no, not enzymes. Before I answer, let me tell you this. This is a bit of information you don't know. But as you know, atoms are made of protons and neutrons, and outside the nucleus there are electrons that go around in orbitals, which we haven't covered, right? But you know that atoms look something like this. This is a bad drawing of an atom, but it'll do. There are these things called energy levels. So there was this guy that I think you might know. His name was Einstein. Yes? You know him? No, of him. In any case, Einstein got a Nobel Prize for describing what's called the photoelectric effect, which has to do with this phenomenon that I'm about to describe to you. It turns out that electrons go around in an energy level. And there's this kind of property, it's one of the laws of thermodynamics, that everything wants to go down to the lowest possible energy level. The evidence of that is teenage life. All of you want to be at rest as much as possible. You don't want to get up when your parents want you to do chores. You don't want to do when teachers give you assignments. You want to sit there and do whatever requires the least amount of effort. That's natural. That's true of all life. All matter, the entire universe. So this energy, when light comes in, a photon hits an electron, the electron will jump up to an extra energy level. Once the photon goes away, the electron jumps back down. Back to its original. It doesn't want to be up there. It's just forced to by the photon. And of course, when it comes back down, it releases another frequency of light. The frequency, by the way, is color. And it emits light. So light comes in, excites the electrons. You excite the electron, goes up. As soon as it comes back down to its resting state, it releases the light energy in the form of light. You see it. You know you've seen this before. You call them glow-in-the-dark paint. That's what glow-in-the-dark paint is. All day long, it's absorbing energy from photons. Once you let it go, once you turn the lights off, it releases all that energy so the electrons can come back down and settle at the lowest possible energy state. So that's what you see all day long. You've seen that. You've seen it before, that kind of chemical luminescence. Photosynthesis, the molecule I'm talking about that's used in photosynthesis is not, it doesn't let go of the light. It absorbs it. It takes it in. It takes in the photons, but it doesn't release it. So it is a molecule. It is a molecule, yes. Multiple atoms. Molecules have multiple atoms that are covalently bonded. That's what a molecule is. It's going to take in photons, but it's not going to release them. Or at least not going to release. It's just going to absorb them. It absorbs them. We call these light-absorbing molecules pigments. You know this. Come on, you know, you've heard the word pigment before, haven't you? Dyes, you've heard of dyes? Like you use it to, yeah, my God, half the girls in the room know people that they have colored their hair. You've used pigments before. Your skin is full of them. Unless you're albino, you have pigments in your eyes and in your hair, in your skin. They absorb light. Our skin and our eyes, they absorb light to protect our cells, our sensitive cells. In the case of paints, when you played with paint when you were a little kid, you played with paint, those are pigments, molecules in there that absorb light. Yeah. Go ahead.
You said once the photon ray
Huh?
releases the electron.
Spell with a Y.
Let's go.
Is pigments PYG?
No.
It is.
Somebody look it up. Somebody look it up. I don't.
Look it up.
Do it again. I want more than one person looking it up. It may be, but I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
You said when the photon ray releases the electron, it creates light.
It doesn't create. Remember, we don't. What is the one thing we can't do?
I mean, it shows.
It emits it. So energy's taken in, right? Because we take energy can be absorbed. We eat it when we eat a hamburger. We're absorbing energy. So energy can go in, but when that electron goes back down, it releases energy in the form of light. So light is changed into kinetic energy for the electron, and then it releases it in the form of light. So the frequency changes. But that's an atom. This is not an atom. This is a molecule. This one isn't. This can absorb the light, but it's not releasing it. Your skin does not glow in the dark. You'll absorb it. Your pigments in your skin will absorb it and keep it. So that's important. In fact, that's how we're able to take that light that our retina sees and we're able to turn it into electrical signals. We're converting light into electricity in our eyes, in our retina, and we're doing it in our brain, and we're thinking. That's what we're doing. Pigments are molecules that can absorb light. So as you know colors, right? So everybody here knows colors. So what if that pigment was not, what would it be if that pigment absorbed all light? What would you call that?
Black.
That's black. So black is not a color. It is indeed the lack of color. So black is actually a lack of color. It absorbs all the light. Any light touching, there's no black in this room. No one in this room, unless you've gone on YouTube and looked up. Oh Lord, I have a headache already. Black, true black. Look up. It's really a cool thing. You can look up on YouTube videos. True black is an excellent use of your time on your way home. Look up YouTube videos with true black, and it's kind of scary how it. Obviously, if it's true black, there is no light. You wouldn't see it. Like you see, look at this table. I can see the edges. I can look at it. If I can see it, it's not true black. True black has no light coming off it. It absorbs all the light. If I were covered in true black paint, which does exist, I can put true black paint. All you would see is I would look like a hole that's moving around, because there's nothing escapes it. No light escapes it, or very little.
Is it white, like no pigments at all? So
It's close. You're close. Let's talk about what. So what is white then? If black is white and black, by the way, in a sense, are not colors. Neither white or black are colors.
Yeah, they're not in the color. They're not in the color.
They're not in a color wheel, but they're not colors at all. Black is the absence of color. And what is white?
All the colors.
All the colors. That's right. And the colors are actually red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Those are the colors of the rainbow in order. You should know that. Roy G. Biv.
What?
Roy G. Biv.
I ain't never heard nobody call it that.
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. That's the order. It's the order you should know, yes?
I'm actually my first period and I can't get it.
Find it and get it. All right, so Roy G. Bibb. All right, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. I think the two papers you need are over there. You're talking about honors, but that's AP biology. They're over there. The syllabus and the study guide. All right, quiet now. I got 5 more minutes, 6 more minutes. So Roy G. Bibb, white is all the colors. Now pay attention. These are the colors, the way you define them, the way I define them, are light. These are frequencies of light that we call the visible light spectrum. That's what we see. There is stuff that we cannot see. For instance, below red is something called infrared. Infrared, you call it heat. There are some animals, specifically snakes, rattlesnakes, that can see infrared. They have special organs that can see heat at night in the desert. It helps them find warmth because as a reptile, they can't make their own warmth at night. They have to find warm places to store themselves.
I thought you were gonna say food. Like they food to eat it.
No, they have, well, they could use it to find food at night too, but it's more of about trying to, they tend to hunt during the day because, anyways, long story. So that's infrared. You know infrared goggles from movies and from video games. You can put infrared goggles on and that lets you see, quote unquote, in the dark. You're really not seeing in the dark. What you're seeing is the infrared light. You don't see infrared light though. You still only see this. You can only see Roy G. Bibb. That's all our eyes can perceive. So you have a machine that can sense infrared and it changes that infrared into visible light. Who's got an X-ray? I got an X-ray just yesterday. I got a bunch of them around my mouth. When you get an X-ray, do you see light? When they point the X-ray machine at you and take it clickety-click, do you see a bunch of lights?
No.
No, but it's there. But how do they see? How do they get a picture? How do they get a graph of that light? How do they get a photograph of that?
They translate.
Well, in a way, they have a film behind your head, or in the case of digital cameras, they have a sensor that is sensitive to X-rays. And they change that machine, or that film, that chemical, will change the X-ray into something that gives you visible light. Is that clear? So what we're doing is we're translating these things we can't see into something that we can see. So what are some of the other light forms? Well, this is below red. What about after violet? By the way, this is lower energy. To your left, lower energy.
Ultraviolet?
That's right. Good. And it goes up to highest energy. The people that are putting stuff away, I may have you stay after class to discuss that. I'm trying to get stuff done, and I still got a few more minutes here in class, so I'll take every minute I can get. So visible light, highest to the right of the violet is ultraviolet, UV. But it's also gamma. Gamma is also over here. A very high frequency, high energy waves. Of course, there's many other forms of, we call this electromagnetic spectrum. Like the cable company. That's where Spectrum gets it. So down lower is radio waves. Lower energy still than infrared, but they're bigger. They're lower energy, but they're inverse. The energy is inverse to the size of the wave. So the fact that they're low energy isn't a big deal because they go a lot further because they're bigger waves. So anyways, visible light is light that we can see. We can only see this part of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's all we can see. Snakes can see that and then go into the infrared a little bit. Some plants and some bugs can see UV light. So different organisms have different pigments that allow them to translate light waves into a... Please stop putting stuff away. Putting on jackets, etc. It's so annoying. So no one's talking to you. Stop being convicted. So light's coming in. Let me ask you a question before you go. If this pigment is what plants are using to absorb light, what's the light that they don't absorb? What's the light that most plants on Earth don't absorb? Green. Why did you say green? Say what? That's right. Pay attention to what he said, because this kid's going to get an A on the test. This light, the green light, is the light that you see. You see the light that's not absorbed. That pigment absorbs all the other lights. The red, the orange, the yellow, the blue, the indigo, the violet is all absorbed by the pigment. There's actually more than one pigment. It's a pigment called chlorophyll.
Oh, I've been drinking that. Yeah.
Chlorophyll, the carotenoids,
You can drink liquid chlorophyll. It's the same.
carotenoids. You can also eat it by eating plants. That's actually probably better for you. Eat some broccoli. It's probably a lot better for you.
Yeah, broccoli's nasty.
Shh. Chlorophyll A. I don't know why you're putting stuff away. I'll tell you what.
3 o'clock.
I'm putting this on the test, and I'm not posting the video until after tomorrow. I'm going to give you a quiz tomorrow on this material, and I'm not posting it. And that's a really good way for me to check who's paid attention, who's not. Have a good day. It's not time yet. It's 3 o'clock now.
It was 3
You
o'clock
put your
when I
stuff
got up
away
at 3
a while back, and you laid your head down and closed your eyes a good half an hour ago. Go ahead and record. So, photosynthesis needs two things and produces two things. It's quite simple. Photosynthesis needs water, H2O, and it needs carbon dioxide, CO2, and it produces sugar, and remember sugars are 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, C6H12O6, and oxygen gas. Now, photosynthesis does not need oxygen gas, but the plant does need oxygen gas, and you'll see that in just a minute. So the question is this balanced? If we look at the first law of thermodynamics, anyone interested in anything to do with chemistry knows that you have to have everything that you need before the reaction happens, and then you need to have everything that's produced must be accounted for. All the atoms, all the energy has to be accounted for. You don't have to use all the CO2, but you have to use whatever you have here, whatever you have on this side, whatever you started with, you have to end with. If you have extra CO2, that's fine, but it has to be on that side of the equation. You cannot have anything on the right that you don't have on the left, or vice versa. Period. So here you have two hydrogen. If you wrote this, you'd be wrong, because it shows 2 hydrogens on this side and 12 hydrogens on this side, and you're telling me you're creating hydrogen. You're telling me you're God, and that's not appropriate. So since we only have 2 hydrogens on this side, you have 12 on this side, where are you going to get the extra 10 electrons? Well, the way we would do it, since we can't add 2 extra hydrogens, we're going to add water. So if I have H2O, how many, well, let me redo this. Give me a second. Let me go ahead and put blanks in front of these. So now we're going to go ahead and divide this into 2 parts and put carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And ask ourselves, how many do we have on the right? How many do we have on the left? Well, on the right, we have 1 carbon, we have 2 hydrogens, and we have 3 oxygens. If you don't see that we have 3, please note that there's 2 in CO2 and there's 1 in water. So together they make 3. Then when we look over here on the right side, you see we have 6 carbons, we have 12 hydrogens, and we have 8 oxygens. Again, 6 on the sugar, on the glucose, and 2 on the oxygen. So they have to match up. How do we get them to match up? Well, I'd like to start in this case. Can we close the door? With carbon. Because I look and I see oxygens in all of these atoms. So anytime I change any of these, every time I change the number of water, the number of carbon dioxides, or the number of sugars, I'm going to change the oxygen. Do you see that? Because if I put a 5 here, that's 5 oxygens plus 2, that's 8. No matter what I do, if I change the number of carbon dioxides or waters, I'm changing the oxygen number, right? So that's a problem. I don't want to start with oxygen because I'll spend the whole day going back and forth trying to figure out how to balance it. I don't like to start with the hydrogens right away. We could, but I'm going to start with the carbon because it's by itself. Carbon's only 1 molecule on the right. It's on 1 molecule on the left. Do you see that? Yes or no? Can we engage? Say, hey. No. So we got 6. So if I balance the carbon, that's a good place to start because once I balance the carbon, they're done. It should be pretty much done unless I have to change it for some reason. So how do I balance this carbon with this? If there's 6 on this side, what do I have to do on this side? How many of these do I need? How many CO2s do I need to make 6? Anybody? 6, because there's only 1 carbon for every CO2. So I need 6. Does everybody see that? So 6 here gives me 6 carbons. So now I can change this 1 can be changed to a 6. Is that good? You guys didn't do this in physics at all? Huh. The number of hydrogens on both sides. Well, what are we going to do? We got 12 hydrogens on this side and 2 on this side. How are we going to get this 2 to equal this 12? How do I get 2 to equal 12? What's the least common denominator? Come on, guys. Times 6. 6 times 2 is... What's going on? Why is it so silent in this room? Wow. I should just have left you with the quiz. So 6 times 2 is 12. That would change the hydrogen to 12. So they're good with that. Now, there's something we didn't say. We changed this to 6, so we got 6 carbons. But what happened to the oxygens when we first did that? Before I did this, before I changed this 6, could you please work with me, say something so I know that you're actually listening to me? It's like I'm back in virtual with your screens off. You turn your screens off? Turn your screens on. Turn them on. Turn them on. I think that's an avatar. I don't actually think you're there. So 6 CO2s, what did that do to the oxygen? How many oxygens do I have? 6 times 2 is 12, plus 1 is 13. So right now, before I added the 6, I had 13. But then I said, well, let me go to the hydrogens, and I wanted to balance it, and I put a 6 here, and that made the hydrogens 12. Is that correct? And that's good, because I can check those off. These are balanced, these are balanced, these are balanced, these are balanced. But now I got how many on this side? Oxygens. I got 6 times 2 is 12, and then 6 times 1 is... So how many hydrogens or oxygens do I have on this side? So I have 18 oxygens on this side. What am I going to do on this side to make this side equal 18? Tell me. Somebody tell me. I'm not moving. I refuse to do all the work. I can only multiply. I can add oxygen or I can add sugar. Yeah.
Add 5 oxygen.
Have 5 oxygens. Why do you say I have 5 oxygens? If I add 5 oxygens, how many, 5 times 2 is,
10.
and then how many of these? So that's 16. That is 16 the same as 18? No, so that doesn't help. I don't want to add anything here. Why don't I want to add anything here? Because it'll unbalance everything else. You see how there's carbon and there's hydrogen, right? I already have those checked off. I'm trying just to balance the oxygen without doing anything else.
Would you
Add 6, that's right. So if I add, so you were very close to the right answer, by the way. So if you add 6, what do you get? 6 times 2 is plus 6.
Interruption, John Hayes. If you are driving a black BMW, license plate JCR3370, we need you to move your truck because it's blocking a parent who's trying to leave the building. Again, if you are driving a
Tell the
black
car, go move your car, hurry up,
license
buddy.
plate JCR3370, please move your vehicle. Thank you.
All right. So just by adding 6, I get this to equal 12 plus this 6 is 18. Now both sides are balanced. That's how we get a balanced chemical equation. That's it. It's just multiplying and adding. These problems are actually kind of fun. They're like little puzzles. They can be very challenging. When you get into chemistry, you'll find some fairly challenging ones. If you stick to some basic rules, it's like, you know what, this reminds me of a Rubik's Cube. As long as you start at the right place and make the right moves in the right sequence, you'll get to the solution. So it's really not hard. You just have to stick to the basic rules. Am I going to ask you to balance this equation? No. What is it that you need to know? For this unit, you need to know this equation, this balanced chemical reaction for photosynthesis. Are we clear? You need to know that. So if I ask you to write it out, you should be able to write it out. What is it you need for photosynthesis? Oh, by the way, I didn't write it in. Maybe I should, but I shouldn't even write green. It should be yellow. You need light. What do you need? What materials do you need? Anybody? Yeah? Sunlight? Water? Not oxygen. Energy comes from sunlight. Food is not, no. You're making food.
Is it carbon dioxide?
Carbon dioxide. It's literally right in front of you. What have I been talking about? You literally haven't been here, have you? Your brains are not working today. I don't know what I can do about that. I can't do anything about that. If you're not going to listen, you're not going to write things that you're not. If your brain's not working, I can't help you. What am I supposed to do? It's right in front of you. That's what this equation means. When I wrote this out, you need water, H2O, and you're adding carbon dioxide in the presence of light, I'm pointing to the screen, to produce sugar and water and oxygen gas. You're producing these two, you're adding these two. Left to right in English, right? We read from left to right. Yes? All right. Are we good with that? That's what you need to know. I never want you to look at me and tell me you need oxygen for photosynthesis. I don't want you to look at me and say, I produce water. I don't want you to say to me anything but I need carbon dioxide and water with sunlight to make sugar and oxygen gas. That's photosynthesis in a nutshell. Are we clear? Okay. I'm sorry I have to raise my voice, but somebody has to be awake. I don't know who else can be awake. It's not going to be you. I got to step it up a gear. I'll turn some rock and roll on if I have to. So when you're talking about a tree has roots. Tree's a good example of a plant. It's a woody plant. You better write down the vocabulary. And it really would help if you'd engage. You'd actually engage, actually ask questions, actually think and write things down. And ask questions. Ask questions. Please ask questions. So, the part you see from a tree is above the ground. You're walking, whenever you walk or swing on a swing, you're dealing with the ground above the roots. Underneath the ground that you're walking on, it looks like it's solid, but there is a level, a water level. That water level can be low or it can be high depending on how much rain you've had over the last month or so. And that water level is also known as the water table. As it rains, when it rains, the water table goes up. And if it floods, you get the water above the ground. But even if the ground is dry, there's water down there. Now, I don't know if anyone has ever lived in the country or gone to suburbs where they have these, but in Berea, for instance, they use well water. What we do to get clean water is we create these things. These things called wells, and they're just holes in the ground. That's all a well is. A hole in the ground, usually to keep down the mud. We'll put bricks or cement on the outside of the well. Stones with gaps in it often will be used, but we don't want to use too much cement because what we want it to be leaky. We want water to get in, and so because this is all water. See, the water table is here, correct? Yes. Say yes. Thank you. We're here together. So the water table's there. So what do you think is going to happen inside this hole?
A lot of water.
And water's going to start pouring in because there's gaps, holes in the wall. So water's going to pour in. We want it to pour in. That's the whole point. And so what happens is this whole thing fills up with water all the way up to the water table. So well has water at the bottom, and then you put your bucket down, collect the water, and pull it back up. That's how old-fashioned wells work. That water that's coming into the well, sifted filtered through rocks and small pebbles. And by the time it went through the dirt, it went through mud, yes, but down here it went through all kinds of tiny little pebbles, gravel first, and then rocks that were tiny little pores. So when the water comes into the well, it's really clean. So this water is pretty safe to drink. Unless somebody poisoned it, it shouldn't be any problems. Or if there's some poison in the earth somewhere, some deadly mineral like I don't know what, but unless you have some really poisonous material here, that shouldn't be a problem for your water. The water should be pretty clean. All the rest of the stuff, the bacteria, viruses, all that's all in here in the earth still. The water's relatively clean, so you should be able to drink it. Now, plants also get water from underground. Plants take water in from their roots. They do not drink from their leaves. Now, that's most plants, vascular plants, plants with xylem and phloem. Mosses don't have any roots at all. They can absorb right through their leaves. They don't have a problem. But for trees and most plants that you'll see in this area, you need roots because that's where the water gets in. So you see people spraying their bushes at home, indoor plants. Spraying the leaves isn't doing anything. It's the water is coming in through the roots. You have to add water to the roots. It might help get the dust off the leaves, which would help the plant do photosynthesis, but it's not going to do much with water. You can't water plants by spraying their leaves. That won't work. You have to put water in their roots. So water goes up the roots, and the reason water goes up is because you have a high concentration of water here, and it goes into the roots where it's low because the plant is losing water. It sweats like you sweat, but we don't call it sweat in plants because they don't have sweat glands. They're not animals. We call it transpiration. So transpiration, what it does is it makes sure that the water concentration at the top of the plant is low. So low water concentration. So this is high and this is low. So water goes into the roots, and then with hydrogen bonding and transpiration occurring creates kind of a vacuum at the top. Water goes up to the leaves. So how does it get up there? What tubes? Like we have arteries and veins, right? But plants don't have arteries and veins. They don't have hearts. They have what's called xylem and phloem. Xylem and phloem. Those are the vasculature. It's called the vasculature, plant vasculature. Right? The arteries and veins of plants. Are we clear on that?
Yes.
So that's the basic anatomy of a plant. So the next question is, that's not really photosynthesis yet. All we know what has the plant gotten from this process? This is how the plant gets what? Water. So now you know how plants get water to every cell in their body. Let's go ahead and look at that. Hopefully that doesn't erase again. Let's look at the leaf, because the leaf is where photosynthesis is happening. Now, there are different shaped leaves, but they all process in different ways, in similar ways. That's one type of leaf. You know pine needles. You know pine needles. Do you know their leaves? Did you know pine needles are leaves?
Yes.
Okay, so they're leaves. They're doing photosynthesis as well. There's different kinds of photosynthesis. There's 3 kinds. You don't need to know them, but if you do take, no, what's it doing? Okay. So if you do take AP biology, you'll need to know CAM photosynthesis, and you'll need to know C4 photosynthesis and C3 photosynthesis. They're all types of photosynthesis. But as I said, we're not going to go into that detail here. Here, they're all pretty much work the same way. It's just that when you're a plant in the desert, you have to do photosynthesis a different way, so you don't waste water, right? Because you don't want to be a cactus losing water to transpiration, sweating all day, because there's no water to replace it. The water table in the desert is very, very deep, very low in the earth, because it doesn't rain that often. If you're talking about a plant in the jungle, it's very hot, and that's not good for photosynthesis. When it gets very hot, I'll tell you later when we're done describing what photosynthesis is, what will happen is that the plant will start doing something called photorespiration, and that's no good. So in the desert, in the jungle, if the plants didn't do it a different way, they wouldn't work. Photosynthesis wouldn't work. So they had to change the way they do things. But plants around here don't have that problem. It's usually not that hot, so it's not that big a deal. All right. So what's interesting about leaves? Leaves are actually really interesting. You guys have taken, what are you guys taking? You guys doing human body systems, right? You guys have done the integumentary system, right? Layers of the skin. Well, a leaf has layers as well. A leaf has a cuticle, has a mesoderm, if you cut a leaf in half, and slice through a leaf, you'd have different regions as well. We're not going to get into that. It's not. I don't really want to get into the different layers of the leaf, but it's important to know that they use this waxy film so that you don't lose too much water. So you have to control how much water you lose, right? You don't want to lose too much water because you'll die. So as a plant, they have these underneath the leaf on the underside. I'm going to go ahead and do one of these things where I'm going to cut out a circle. And what you'll see underneath the leaf is these strange little cells. They're called guard cells. 2 of them. They actually end up looking, you can look them up yourself, but they're really freaky. They're like nightmarish, actually, to me. They look like lips. And there's hundreds of them underneath each leaf. As they swell up, they close the gap. If they shrink up, they open the gap. So literally, they're like the nostrils of the plant. They let air in and out. So they'll form these, these are called guard cells. And as it's doing its business, CO2 is going to go in and oxygen is going to leave. And water is also going to leave. That's how water gets out of the plant. That's how it does transpiration. It sweats through these little, it's actually gas water is leaving, and CO2 is going in, and oxygen gas is coming out. That's how the plant breathes. The plant breathes through its leaves, through these guard cells. This opening is called stomata. It's either open or closed. Stomata. Guard cells close, they swell up, they close, they shrink, they open up. So now, that's great. Let's go down the list and see what we've done. We know where water's coming in. Water here is, where is it coming in? We know where it's leaving. We know CO2 is coming in at the leaf. It's not leaving. It's not produced, right? We know that oxygen gas is coming in. It'll come in the leaf as well, but really it's leaving in the leaf. Net, it's leaving in the leaf. And, well, that's it. That's all we need. Light is obviously coming in through the leaf, into the leaf. But so far, that's what we have. We know where water's coming in. We know where water's going. Excess water, we're using some of it. We know where CO2 is going into the leaf. We know where oxygen is leaving. It's leaving the plant through the leaf. So now let's take a close look at the cell of a plant. So really, this should not say leaf. It's not, CO2 isn't leaving, it's going in through the leaf. And oxygen is leaving through the leaf. Are we good with that? Cell of a plant has a nucleus, a nucleolus, the DNA is in the nucleus, has an endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth, has a Golgi body, little vesicles leaving, has a big vacuole, a central vacuole. That stores water, helps osmoregulate the water, controls how much water's in the cell, so it keeps it. So that's a plant. Of course, it has a cell wall. I shouldn't have to tell you that, but I must say some people were confused about that the other day, and I was just like, wow. But yeah, the plants have cell walls. Oops. They can swell up and they can fill the cell wall or shrink it, right? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. They have two other organelles that we're focusing on this week, and one is a mitochondria. So it does use oxygen. The plant uses oxygen. Let's be clear on that. And the other one is the chloroplast. And the chloroplast is what we're focused on for photosynthesis. There's an amazing, beautiful balance here because the chloroplast is putting out oxygen, gas, all right, and it's putting out sugar. And then that oxygen gas goes into the mitochondria. The sugar goes into the mitochondria. Not the sugar, but that's not true. It goes through some steps, and some parts of the sugar go into the mitochondria. And out from the mitochondria, interestingly, comes out CO2, and that goes into the chloroplast. And of course, ATP comes out, and ATP is used by the whole cell. This is the whole point, right? This is what we're trying to deal with is ATP. Correct?
Yeah.
So together, these two make this really beautiful symbiotic relationship. Very much, have you guys watched Kung Fu Panda at all?
Yeah.
So the whole point of that movie, of all, I think there's 3 of them now. So all 3 of the movies, the whole point is balance, right? You see Shifu balancing the rocks. You see the panda standing on a rock, balancing something, a stick, and then he finally eats all the dumplings or whatever. He learns what? Balance, right? Because in all the world, if you have balance, you have the key to life, right? And that's exactly what's happening in a cell. That's always what's happening. In every cell, you're trying to find balance, homeostasis. Isn't it beautiful that what one organelle makes, the other one uses? And what one produces on this side, the first one uses. And it's a cycle, never-ending cycle. Plants have no need of humans. If every human on the planet disappeared, every animal disappeared, plants would do fine. They would keep growing and growing and growing. We need them. They don't need us. They're amazing, beautiful creatures that not only are they literally beautiful in the form of flowers and trees, etc., but they're beautiful in what they do, and they're necessary. So fundamentally necessary. All right, so that is the key to those two organelles. But now let's go ahead and take a look at this chloroplast. Closer look at chloroplast. Chloroplasts have these stacks that look like pancakes. I don't like pancakes, my wife does, but they're these stacks of membranes. They're creating all these chambers. The key here is that these are creating compartments. They're full of these membranes, and the whole point here, and I just want to emphasize this, that this is compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is key here, because it allows us to create many compartments that we can separate things. And you'll see by the end of this that in order to have a chemiosmotic gradient, you have to have spaces that are different. You have to have a high side and a low side. And that's the only way this is going to work. And so having all these little rooms, these compartments, allows us to create these spaces that allow for separating materials. All right. So again, looking at this and taking one of these, by the way, this whole thing here is called a granum. Each stack is a granum. And each individual membrane is called a thylakoid. All right, so the thylakoid and then the thylakoid stack on top of each other and create a stack that's called a granum. Now we're going to go ahead and look at one of these membranes. These thylakoids are membranes, so they have. You know what? Let me make this smaller and draw a giant membrane because we're going to need a lot of space. So one of these thylakoid membranes is obviously a double membrane, a phospholipid layer. It's a membrane. We know this. Everybody should know this. There should be no surprises. Embedded in these membranes are these membrane proteins that are very important. We're going to look at some of them now. Some of these membranes here, membrane proteins. Now I'm not gonna sit here and tell you, we're not gonna talk about all the different molecules involved in these photosystems, or the different pigments. But in the photosystems, you have certain pigments that we know are chlorophyll. Right? You know, we talked about that yesterday, did we not? That was a question. Chlorophyll, A and B, and we also have these things called carotenoids. These are the pigments that take up the light. You need to know that there are different pigments in different plants, different concentration of pigments, but they all pretty much do the same thing. They're absorbing the light. So the light's hitting the leaf. It's getting through the leaf. It's hitting the thylakoid. In the thylakoid, the very first thing that you get is the hitting of photosystem 2. I think have gone over like 5 of the vocabulary words in this list. Thylakoid membrane, the lumen, the stomata, the stroma. I haven't talked about stroma or thylakoid membrane / lumen. I haven't mentioned Calvin cycle or any of that yet, but we've covered a lot of this stuff that you see on this list. So photosystem 2, what it's doing is it's going to take this photon, this is coming from the sun or the light, the grow light, and it's going to hit photosystem 2, and what's going to happen is that's going to take water What is water? It's an oxygen with 2 electrons on each side there and 2 hydrogens, correct? And so this has 2 electrons. Obviously it's all balanced. So then out on the other side, is you're going to end up with, and you're going to take 2 of these. To be honest, let's go ahead and do the whole thing here. You're going to take 2 of these, 2 waters, and go ahead and draw this out, I guess. One photon for each water. Is that clear? Yes?
Yeah.
I only want to balance the equation. And you're going to rip off the electrons. You're going to take these electrons off these bonds. You're going to rip the hydrogens off. And each hydrogen is going to come off with its own electron. And you're going to get H pluses. You're going to have 4 H pluses. And you're going to have 4 electrons. 4 hydrogens, 4 electrons. Then you're going to have 2 waters. What do you think they're going to do, these 2 waters? What do you think they're going to do? I hope they're going to, they're going to combine into oxygen gas. That's what oxygen gas is. This is what we breathe in. That's where, in fact, it was photosynthesis that allowed there to be oxygen in the atmosphere. Photosynthetic bacteria called cyanobacteria created the atmosphere that we breathe, changed this planet from purple to blue, and allowed oxygen to fill the air and allow animals to develop. Without oxygen, there would be without the oxygen, there'd be no animals. You wouldn't be able to do it because plants have that symbiotic relationship between chloroplasts and mitochondria. As the chloroplast makes oxygen, the mitochondria uses it. Without that, we wouldn't be here. Because they made so much oxygen, they literally changed the planet. Your question?
Okay, so what was it purple?
Because of the purple bacteria that filled the seas. They did a type of photosynthesis that did not produce oxygen. But then this kind of photosynthesis took over because it was better and so they took over and that changed the planet's color. Because remember, the planet's color comes from what? Reflections and refractions of light, right? What do you think? What do you think? Why is the sky blue? Yeah. Nope. It's a good guess, though. Excellent guess. We'd try to apply the knowledge we did yesterday, correct? So the sky is blue because of refraction. Light travels through the atmosphere, and as water is in the air, as it hits the little tiny water molecules, it bends the light. The water molecule, as light moves through different media, like as light goes through a glass of water, for instance, it bends. You can try this experiment at home. You can take a clear glass, fill it with water, put a pencil in it, then look at it from the side. What do you see? It's bent, isn't it? The pencil looks bent. It's not bent. It looks bent because the light bouncing off the pencil bends as it goes into the water and as it comes out of the water. And because it's bending, it moves. Now, the water molecules in the sky bend the light so much that we see most of the light comes in at us, but the blue light gets bent the most, and that's what you see in the sky is blue. The ocean water is clear, but it acts as a mirror. What is it mirroring? The sky. And so the reason the ocean is blue is because the sky is blue. The ocean is not blue. The ocean's clear, water is clear. Sometimes it's green. Because why is it green? Because, well, in a way, because of algae, which are doing what? Photosynthesis. But so they're green. Now imagine if it was a lot of bacteria that were purple. What color would be reflected up? Purple. So if you look down at the sky, at the earth, you're looking at the earth from outside, looking down. The sky wouldn't be purple, right, if you were on the earth. But if you look down at the earth, right now you would see blue. Why? Because the light that's being refracted off the oceans is what? Blue. But now what happens if you're looking down on the planet and the oceans are purple because of purple bacteria that are doing that type of photosynthesis? You're an alien coming to Earth. What color would the Earth be? Purple. So these bacteria that we're looking at today, and the plants that you don't like, change the planet that we love so much into a blue planet. All right. We still have purple bacteria. You can actually still find them, by the way. They're still in some places. I'll show you some video footage. Some extreme places on the planet, but you can find them. So now we got oxygen gas. So that's coming out of the chloroplast. That's going out of the chloroplast, it produces, this kind of photosynthesis produces so much oxygen, so much extra oxygen, that the plant actually puts it out of the stomata, right out of the right out of the leaf. It kicks it right out. I like how she looks at me like, what? What'd I do? You know you're wrong, so stop. What did I do? You're not focused. You're giggling and talking instead of focused on what we're talking about. So now, here's the key. In this lumen, this is called the lumen. Lumen is a space. In this lumen, what we want, another vocabulary word for the record, is high hydrogen ions. That's the point. We have high hydrogen ion concentration. You need to have that in this space. And you'll see why in a minute. Well, the hydrogen ions we're getting from where? We're getting hydrogen ions from water. The plants are ripping off hydrogen ions from water. Just keep pulling the water up the roots to the leaves, ripping them off every time, using a photon's energy to rip out like a laser beam, breaking the bonds between hydrogen and oxygen. Now you got all this hydrogen ion out here, and you got these electrons. The electrons have a lot of energy. Where'd they get that energy? What do electrons do with light? I told you yesterday, what do electrons do with light? They absorb it. When I post this, go back and review it. If you'd listened the first time and write it down and then study it every night, you'd know the answer to this information, or at least have some clue, because I can see you weren't here, so you have an excuse, but the rest of these kids have answers. Did you? Did you really? So electrons absorb the energy from the photon. So now this electron is full of energy. Really, really. So this is like a charging station. Somebody from the other class said, I'm telling you, yes, this morning's conversation was so beautiful, I almost cried. So the kids were really engaged. I don't know why, but they were. They get here early, though, and they're hanging out together in the dining hall. So maybe you guys might think about trying to do something like that, like getting here a little earlier, maybe eating breakfast, having conversations. I have hot chocolate if you want it early before class. It might help you get engaged in class. Just a thought. Photosystem 2 is a charging station. So it charges those electrons. It also takes the electrons off the water. It produces oxygen gas. That's it for water and all of photosynthesis. That's the reason you needed water is to rip off the hydrogens and get the electrons. You don't need the oxygen, or the chloroplast doesn't need the oxygen. Photosynthesis does not need the oxygen. But how are we going to get the hydrogen ions from here into a high concentration? How do we go from low to high? How can we do that? Who remembers their diffusion and osmosis? How do we go from low to high? Say what now? Active transport. Excellent. Excellent answer. That's exactly right. We need active transport. We need energy. We're not going to use ATP because that's the whole point. We're trying to make ATP. We don't want to use it, but we can use the energy from the photon. And so what happens is the electron, I'm going to go ahead and make it yellow for electrons. The electron's going to get hopped from one carrier to the other carrier to another carrier. And every time it gets hopped, it gets passed on, like a game of hot potato. Have you ever played hot potato? So that's exactly what these carriers are doing. They're passing the electron on. So what happens is that the hydrogen ions then go through. Why are they going through? Because the electron's pulling them through. So every time the electron gets passed over, a hydrogen ion goes through, creating a higher and higher concentration of hydrogen ions inside the lumen of the thylakoid lumen. So hydrogen ions just get pulled in there, creating this high concentration, this low. That's photosystem 2. But now at the end, this little electron is done. It's tired. It's gone uphill and it's exhausted. So this electron here, oh, is it? All right. So try to pay attention when I post this. Okay, so now you're going to hear some background. Some kids are playing Uno in the back during this unassigned time. So if you hear that background noise, I'm sorry. But here you have photosystem 1 now is going to, that electron, which is low energy, right? It's a low energy electron, is going to go into photosystem 1. Why is 2 first? Don't ask. So, I don't know. The photon is, another photon is going to come in and excite that electron again, bringing it up to a very high energy. And when it comes out of the photon system, out of the photosystem, the electron is going to be high energy. So then that electron is going to be picked up by an electron carrier, NADP plus and H plus. They're going to come together along and pick up that electron. Again, the electron is going to be passed to another carrier in here and then passed off to this electron carrier here, NADP. And that's going to become NADPH. This is all happening inside the thylakoid and outside the thylakoid. This is the lumen of the thylakoid here. Here's a high concentration of hydrogen ions. Here's a low concentration. You need energy to go from low to high, so that's you're getting it from the electrons. They got that energy from the photon. There's quinone and other kinds of carriers in the membrane that transport the electron across from one in this chain of electron carriers that we call an electron transport chain. So electron transport chain, ETC, in the chloroplast, and that allows for hydrogens to go from low to high. And then this is high hydrogen ions are going to be very important. You'll see in just a minute. And then NADPH is picked up here, and NADPH is made with that final electron. And that just keeps going over and over and over. Whether each photon that hits the plant, this happens, breaking down water, making oxygen gas. The oxygen gas leaves the chloroplast, and some of it's used in the mitochondria, the rest is put out of the leaf. So now, that being said, let me do something here. Let me group all this. So now if we take this and look at the other end, so this is only a schematic drawing, so you're going to have to consider that this is all happening along the membrane, multiple times along the membrane. There's multiple copies of this. But on the other side of the membrane, here you have a lot of hydrogen ions on this side, so there's a lot of this hydrogen ions on this side. And the whole lumen is full of them, so this is very acidic, so I want to go over this one more time. Very acidic, right in here. It's high hydrogen ion concentration, which means a low pH. Remember, the relationship between pH and hydrogen ion concentration is reversed, so that's because it's a negative log of hydrogen ion concentration. So we'll go ahead and just consider that. And you have all these hydrogen ions. Now, there's this enzyme that's embedded in the membrane that's called ATPase. This is going to make ATP. It's going to take ADP, again, based on the activity you had on Friday, plus inorganic phosphate. And it's going to it's going to go through and pick up, give this moving from high to low is going to turn the enzyme round and round like a water wheel as the hydrogen ions go from inside to outside. ADP and phosphate is going to make ATP. And this was the goal, right? Is to make ATP. This is one of the goals. But we're going to use this ATP because the goal of photosynthesis is not to make ATP, as I hope you know, but to make sugar. So we have ATP and we have NADPH. So again, you have the ATP from the ATPase. What's driving this pump, this channel protein, this enzyme? It's the high concentration of hydrogen ions. So you have this hydrogen ion concentration. It's very high in the lumen of the thylakoid lumen. It's inside the thylakoid. It's very high pH, very low pH, very high hydrogen ion concentration. And these hydrogen ions are going to go flowing through the ATPase, and it's going to start making ADP and phosphate turn into ATP. Now, that ATP and the phos and the NADPH is going to come in we're still in the chloroplast, and it's going to go into the Calvin cycle. So the Calvin cycle, you have to understand one of the first steps of the Calvin cycle is you're going to need CO2. And it's a cycle that has a bunch of different conversions. Atoms are exchanged, energies exchanged. I'm not going to go into the detailed things beyond the level of this class to discuss that. But I think there's some key points that I think you should know if you're going to know. The Calvin cycle is also known, by the way. We should go back and make sure that I emphasize this. All the stuff that happened over here in the thylakoid membrane was dependent on light. So we call these the light-dependent reactions. The Calvin cycle, on the other hand, does not require light. It doesn't happen in the dark. Some people used to call it the dark reactions, but actually they're just a light, independent reactions. So let's be clear on that. It's called the Calvin cycle. So ATP is going to go in. You got ATP, which is a source of chemical energy. You got NADPH, which is bringing more energy because this is bringing those electrons to the electron carrier. So NADPH goes in. Plus ATP is going in. And out on the other end, that's where you're getting the energy to put into the molecule. You're putting this energy into the molecule. So these two things go in, and not going in exactly in this place. They go into different places, but we're just going to go ahead and kind of summarize it this way. Out is going to come NADP plus hydrogen ions plus ADP plus inorganic phosphate, and all that's going to go back to the thylakoid membrane and make more. So this is a big cycle, right? It's going to just keep going back and forth. So this just keeps cycling where it goes back to light-dependent reactions and make more NADPH from other electrons that are being ripped off water, making more ATP, bringing it back to the Calvin cycle. So that explains where the energy, this is all explaining where the energy came from, right? So this is the energy required, This is bringing the energy and required for the Calvin cycle that you're going to need to put into sugar, because your ultimate goal, of course, at least I hope it's clear at this point, your ultimate goal is to make sugar. And sugar is going to be, what is sugar? High energy? And it's going to make, it's going to be high energy, and ultimately glucose is going to be C6H12O6. So we got the high energy. That's fine. That's coming from here, right? This is where you're going to get your high energies from NADPH, from ATP, all that coming from the light reactions. But where are you getting the carbon? You need carbon. So far, we haven't seen any carbon. Notice that NADPH, H plus, ATP, all this is staying in this cycle, so there's no carbon being transferred over to the Calvin cycle. I hope by now you understand that the carbon that's in sugar comes from CO2. But CO2 is not easy to capture. So you need to capture CO2 just like you have pigments that capture light. You need something that's going to capture CO2, and that is this enzyme called Rubisco. Arguably the most important enzyme on the planet. Okay, so that's a big claim, but I'll argue that. And that CO2 is going to capture CO2. Rubisco captures CO2 in the light-independent reactions. It captures CO2. And now that CO2, if you take 3 CO2s plus turning this cycle every time, 3 CO2s, one turn of this cycle is going to put together a 3-carbon sugar. C3H6O3. And that sugar, 2 of those times 2 will lead you to allow the plant to make glucose, right? So this is a C3, so it's a C3 photosynthesis. So this is the C3 photosynthesis. Because you're creating these 3-carbon sugars. So then, ultimately, you can still form that glucose molecule, that C6H12, but that's by doing this C3 times 2, right? So that's why we call it C3 photosynthesis. But there is 2 others that we're not going to talk about, but you should know. There's C4 photosynthesis is going to do various arrangements because it has to separate yet again the reactions in order to stop photorespiration from occurring. C4 is also a possibility in some plants in the desert or jungle, and then of course the CAM photosynthesis for those same alternative places. C3 photosynthesis, though, is the photosynthesis that we're going to focus on learning, and that's all you really need to know about photosynthesis, except for this idea of photorespiration. So photorespiration is not a good thing, and that's when everything you just saw would happen. But instead of Rubisco capturing CO2, when one of 2 things is happening, when oxygen concentration is high, or when the temperature is hot, and or when temperature is high, when these conditions are the case, so in the desert or in the jungle, right, where you have a high temperature, relatively high oxygen, then what happens is Rubisco does not capture CO2. Rubisco captures oxygen gas. That's why we call it photorespiration, because respiring means the use of oxygen, right? So what we're doing is we're capturing oxygen. The rubiscos are capturing oxygen, and that's no good because you can't make sugar from oxygen. It doesn't. There's no carbon. So this is wasted. All that energy is wasted. It doesn't kill. This necessarily doesn't kill the plant, but the fact that you're not making sugar, using all this energy, all this movement, all this work to produce nothing, a useless product, then the plant runs into problems and ends up dying. So if this happens enough, then the plant ends up dying, which is why in hot places where the temperature is high, you're going to use one of these two types of photosynthesis. And in the desert, where you have to conserve water, you're going to use one. And in the jungle, where you don't really have to worry about water, but you do have to worry about high temperatures, you're going to use the other. The bottom line is in C3 photosynthesis, in temperate regions like in Cleveland and most of America, in most of the United States, that's not really high temperature. It's not. We're not dealing with really high or very high temperature or dry temperatures. Then you're not going to get you can just use regular C3 photosynthesis. But this photorespiration is the reason you need another type of photosynthesis in these other areas where they're hot or they're dry. All right. So I've said in the past, well, maybe that's a nuanced point that we'll make later, but that's it. That's everything about photosynthesis you need to know for the test. I've covered just about everything that I see on the study guide, except maybe reaction center. The reaction center is what's happening at the center of the photosystems. Thylakoid membrane lumen, the granum, the stomata, the stroma, the light reactions, the Calvin cycle, NADP, NADPH, photophosphorylation. I haven't covered I haven't talked about that word, photophosphorylation, but we'll just let that, you can scratch that one off your list. Carbon fixation is the rubisco. Rubisco is fixing carbon. Fixing means, there's carbon, fixing means attaching or making stay or being, holding down. And rubisco is capturing, holding down CO2, so fixing CO2. Wavelength and photons we talked about just yesterday. Chlorophyll A and B and carotenoids we talked about yesterday and today. Photosystems 2 and 1 we just discussed. The reaction center is part of photosystem 2 and 1. The primary electron acceptor we've talked about is NADPH is electron acceptor. That's a carrier that takes it to the Calvin cycle. Autotrophs, photoautotrophs, heterotrophs, and decomposers and chloroplasts we've talked about. So that takes care of about a giant section of your list of vocabulary words that we've discussed in class. Tomorrow we will hit respiration, and we'll talk about glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain again, and that's what happens in the mitochondria. So again, we start off with the chloroplast, start off with the cell. We have to remember that when you're talking about a cell, you have a chloroplast and a mitochondria in a plant cell. Oxygen is put out by the chloroplast, put in by the mitochondria. Sugar's taken in by the mitochondria after a few steps changes. ATP and CO2 come out. CO2 is then used by the chloroplast. Round and round it goes. The only thing the plant needs really is some water and some light, and it can make its own food. The chloroplasts, all these different components of the chloroplast are the granum and the thylakoids. When we look inside the thylakoid, we see this is the activity that's happening. We're making ATP through the ATPase. And really it's not ATPase. I should really call it what it is, which is ATP synthetase. I always call it ATPase. I don't know why I make that mistake, but I do. ATP synthetase. Correct that tomorrow, ATP synthetase. Which is making ATP. And the whole point of taking the water, making the electrons and hydrogens and using that light in photosystem 2 in the reaction center that's inside photosystem 2. It's a complicated structure. We don't really need to get into it in this class. But that photon is able to take those electrons and move them from one carrier to the next in the membrane, that ubiquinone, etc. And as it moves the electron from carrier to carrier, hydrogen ions go across the membrane, fill up the lumen, making this space here, this lumen, high hydrogen ion concentration or low pH, right? Remember they're opposite, making it acidic in here. And it keeps pumping it. Where'd they get the energy to go from low to high? It did it using a photon. The electron energy is low here at the end. Another photon comes and excites it, passed along like a game of hot potatoes to the end. The final electron acceptor here was this NADPH. NADPH then is going to take that electron, high energy electron, along with any ATP that it's able to make, and it's going to transfer it over to the Calvin cycle, where it's going to take all that energy and put it into a 3-carbon sugar. 2 of these 3-carbon sugars can then be put together to make a 6-carbon sugar. The enzyme that collects the CO2 that add to the sugar is Rubisco. NADPH and ATP get broken down. The energy gets put into the system, which then gets put into sugar. NADP plus, H plus, ADP, and phosphate all go back to the light reactions. And the cycle keeps going back and forth over and over again, making more and more sugar, putting it together to make wood, which we use for chairs and tables, or sugar and root starch like potatoes, or sugar and beets that we can use to make refined sugar, white sugar that we put on our cereal, or brown sugar we put on our cereal, whatever the color is. It's still glucose, and that glucose is a 6-carbon sugar. Even fructose is a 6-carbon sugar, just a slightly different process these are going to make, but the general idea of taking the energy from light and putting it and combining it with the CO2 from the air, using this most important enzyme in the world, Rubisco, putting them together to produce ultimately glucose. Again, this is C3 process, 3-carbon sugar. There's a C4 and a CAM that you'll learn about later if you take AP biology or college biology when you get to college. We've talked about photorespiration, the problems that is developed for plants there. I hope that clarifies any questions about photosynthesis and what's going to be on the test. All right, very good.